Something that I've noticed when it comes to people who are like, I struggle with productivity, I struggle with getting things done, is that if you actually follow them around with a video camera for a day, what you would see is them being very busy, doing a lot of stuff. Their struggle is less productivity and more impulsive overcommitment. So here's what that can look like. They impulsively overcommit to too many projects at once. So they'll start out a month and be like, I'm doing all of these things without really considering how much they're capable of and how much time they realistically have. I call this secret project hoarding, and I made a whole video about it. I'll have it linked below. They often will start a task intentionally, but impulsively overcommit to that task, spending way too much time hyper-focusing on specific little details that are not really that important, and forgetting all of the other stuff that they put on their to-do list. They also might overexcitedly put too much on their to-do list for the day, and because of that, they're never really getting through their to-do list. And over time, when you're doing the kind of things I just talked about, over and over again, you erode your sense of self-trust. Your sense of like, yes, I can rely on myself to follow through and I can rely on myself to get things done. I can trust myself to do what I set out to do. And in this podcast episode, I want to talk about firstly why you impulsively overcommit to stuff, but most importantly, how to build your sense of self-trust so that you can get to a point where you're like, yes, I can rely on myself to get things done. I know that I can be honest with myself about what I'm actually capable of and that I will look after my future self, not just my present self. So before we start talking about how to build on that self-trust, let's talk about why you are impulsively overcommitting to things. And if you really want to just skip to the like, let's do something about it, what steps can I take? I have timestamps down below. Also, welcome to Grow With Intention, the podcast of people who want to create a life that feels good. So why do we do this? Firstly, it feels really productive to commit to things. When you write a bunch of tasks on your task list, it actually gives you a little sense of accomplishment. So it just feels good to commit to stuff and be like, yeah, look at all the things that I'm going to do. Secondly, in the moment, it is way easier on your brain. According to a guy called David Rock, who is the director of the Neuro Leadership Institute, intentionally thinking through and making decisions about your priorities is an extremely energy-hungry process. One of the most energy-hungry processes of the brain. To sit down and ask yourself, okay, what's actually important here? What do I need to cut? What do I need to put first, second, third? It's extremely effortful for your little prefrontal cortex. So if you in the past have gotten away with thoughtlessly making your way through tasks or taking on additional things without really thinking it through and intentionally choosing your priorities and really thoughtfully going, do I have the time for this? That's a beautiful shortcut for your brain. Like, of course, your brain is going to continue taking that shortcut rather than doing the more energy intensive process. Why would it choose the hard route when it could choose the easy route that has technically worked for you in the past, even though it's caused a bit of chaos? And keep in mind, your brain is a shortcut queen. If it can get what it perceives to be a reward in a quicker time, even if it's more destructive long term, like it's not thinking long term. It's thinking, how can I conserve energy right now? If you are interested in how to rewire the reward processes in your brain, I did create a podcast episode about that. I'll have it linked below. It would be helpful to accompany this video. Now let's talk about how to escape the trap of not ever prioritizing, of impulsively taking stuff on, of impulsively moving through your to-dos and stuff, keeping yourself busy, but never getting to any of your priorities. Which when you really boil it down, what impulsive overcommitting really is the act of lying and pretending to yourself and ignoring how your future self will be impacted by your present self's decisions. There's no shame in this, but that's what it is. The first thing that you can do is to create a process for prioritization, and I am not talking about the Eisenhower matrix before you click off. So if you impulsively overcommit, your to-do lists are always too long, you're taking on secret projects left and right. Firstly, we know prioritizing is one of the most energy-hungry activities for the brain. Your brain is naturally going to want to avoid it. Secondly, if you do not have a clear step-by-step process for how to prioritize that feels easy, possible, accessible for your brain, you'll end up sitting there going, well, how do I prioritize? Which is even more energy-hungry and just exhausting, which is why you need a step-by-step process that you can go back to over and over again when it comes to prioritizing. And you need to be doing this like weekly, if not twice a week, at times when you are at your highest energy. Think morning times, think times when you are relaxed, like maybe a Sunday morning where things feel easy breezy and you feel capable of prioritizing. You don't have a bunch of other stuff on your plate that feels more important. I'm gonna be so real, I am not a good prioritizer, and this is something that I've had to look into for like years. And I tried really hard to make things like the Eisenhower matrix work for me, the Pareto principle, 80-20. I still love the Pareto principle, but it's not very good for like week to week prioritizing for me. Eat the frog, I've given that a go. I've done it all. But now I have a method that works for my brain. I have covered this before in my video all about secret projects. I'll have that link below, would recommend it, but let's talk through it because this is something that if you struggle with productivity, you need to be doing. Like you need to be prioritizing prioritization. if you struggle with productivity. That almost needs to be like your number one priority. So step one is to brain dump all of your problems, because problems are projects. For example, if your problem is, oh, my house just feels so messy right now, there's so much stuff, the project for that is declutter my house. Nearly every problem can become a project. So once you've done this, you'll end up with a big list of problems turned into projects, and it'll feel overwhelming, and you'll be like, well, it's all important. What am I supposed to do first? That's when we start the rating. Rate each project, asking yourself the question, how much will getting this done impact my sense of calm? Do the same for money. So how much will this project impact how much income I'm earning? Consider time saved. So how much will doing this project impact the amount of time I save each week? If it's relevant, customer impact. So how much will this delight my customers? And also rate your inclination and motivation. So like, how inclined are you to do this project right now? Other things you can consider are things like energy, or like, how much will I learn from this project? Really think through your own values, and you can rate every project based on your values, the things that are important to you right now. If you have like a yearly theme, you could even rate all your projects by how much do they relate to my yearly theme or my yearly goals. Once you've rated all of those factors, it becomes immediately more obvious where you should start, especially in comparison to like just listing a bunch of things and going, okay, what's most important? But even still, you may need to move to step 3, which is band-aiding. Because sometimes you'll rate everything and still end up with a bunch of stuff that you're like, I physically could not get this all done in the next week or month, and I don't know what to cut. One of the biggest causes of overwhelm is all or nothing thinking. And I talked about that in depth in my podcast episode titled How to Pick One Thing When You Want to Do Everything. Particularly if you have ADHD, this is going to be something that you struggle with. Like, if you have a project listed on your plate, you feel like in order to do it, you'll need to do it full out. And if you know in the back of your mind you're not capable of doing it full out, you may not even want to touch it, which is where band-aiding can be really, really helpful. Band-aiding is asking yourself, what quick fix for this problem would reduce my stress and help me to function short term? For example, if you've got on your list, I desperately need to declutter my wardrobe. It's overwhelming me every single day, like it's in my face, etc., etc. A band-aid for that would be setting a timer for 10 minutes and pulling out some obvious no's from your closet. Instead of doing a full deep clean and declutter, you're just getting it to the point where it's functional. And you can put the deep clean declutter off because you put on a bit of a band-aid to get you to the point where you're like, I can handle that how it is for a little bit longer. So that's my method for prioritizing, and that is the method that works really well for me. I did go probably a bit more in depth on this on my secret projects video, which I will have linked below, but I really encourage you to find your own process for prioritizing that you trust, that you're like, yeah, no, when I do that, I immediately have a sense of what is most important and what I should focus on first. Because if you don't have that, you are constantly going to be confused. You're constantly going to be scattered. It's going to be so hard to get things done. For me, things like the Eisenhower matrix and the Pareto principle and even Eat the Frog, like, were just not it. But you might find that they totally are it, so look into those as well. So once you've got a step-by-step process for how you prioritize, the next thing that I want to talk about embedding into your brain is this mantra. Don't slide, decide. This is one of my favorite productivity mantras, right alongside we don't flinch at our feelings and the question, what are you willing to do? All ones that I've shared before. As you move through your days, don't slide, decide. As you start your weeks, let's not slide, let's decide. This should be one of your go-to statements. However, if you cannot catch yourself sliding, you're never going to do more deciding. There is this feeling that you get when you are sliding through your days. And by sliding, I mean impulsively committing to random things instead of the stuff that you said you'd prioritize. And in the words of Jamie Smart, if you're caught in a trap, what is the one thing that you have to do before you escape? You have to realize that you have been caught in a trap. And the only way to do this, unfortunately, is through mindfulness. But I have a technique that sounds more exciting than mindfulness, but is mindfulness. And this was shared by a Twitter user. I can't remember the name of them, but hopefully I'll have found the tweet and I'll put it on the screen and down below. Basically set yourself like 3 to 4 weeks where every single time you go to do something new in your day, write it down on paper. You're basically documenting every single decision that you make in a day right before you make that decision. Because really what most of productivity is getting better at deciding, making more intentional choices. And when you're sliding through your day, you're often actually making so many choices, but you're not even conscious of the choices that you're making. You are sliding. The guy who posted about this technique was like, yep, this changed my life in the space of like 2 weeks. I've never been more intentional. And I'm not surprised because impulsivity is one of the key factors in struggle with productivity. They've measured it. And by writing down every decision before you make it, you immediately reduce your impulsivity. Let's talk about the third thing that you can do if you have a tendency to get swept up in stuff. Imagine you're taking care of a kid and you need to take them to a fast food joint that has a playground, but you're time poor. The smartest thing that you can do is set their expectations before you go. In the car, just say like, hey, we're gonna go get some like yummy treats, but we don't have time to play on the playground. That way when you arrive, they don't immediately jump to go to the playground. Now imagine you didn't set their expectations. You walk into the fast food joint and they immediately beeline for the playground. And then you have to inform them like, hey, actually we don't have any time for the playground. You're gonna have to get down from there. Meltdowns, tears. When you don't preset limits ahead of time, it can be really confusing for a kid, and I argue for an adult as well. So to really like take this and actually make it actionable as you move about your days, try setting yourself limits. And before you do things, set your expectations about where your limits are. You probably know yourself well. You probably know what kind of things you might hyper focus on that are unimportant, that don't really add value, that are really at the end of the day a waste of time. Go into those tasks and say to yourself, yeah, we're going to do this, but here's where we're not going to waste our time. Those things are out of bounds. That way you've already preset the expectation of what you're not doing. Immediately making it easier to manage the impulse to do that thing. Now let's talk Recs of the Week. I always finish my podcast episode with Recs of the Week for those of you who want to dive deeper into the topics I talked about in today's podcast episode, starting with the procrastination equation. This was actually the first book that I read that really hammered home the idea that difficulties with productivity are more related to impulsivity than anything else. If I'm being honest, that was the main point that I got from this book. I'm sure there were some other really good things too. But if you're more interested in the research behind that, this book does talk about that. And the second book that I would recommend is The Joy Choice by Michelle Segar. I'll never miss an opportunity to recommend a Michelle Segar book. Queen. It might seem unrelated because this book is about health and wellness, but what Michelle talks about a lot in The Joy Choice is the choice point. So the choice point is basically that point in time where you're standing there and you're like, do I work out or do I stay in bed? And she talks a lot about how to become more mindful of those choice points, which is basically the don't slide, decide principle. This video technically is just about becoming more mindful of your choice points, but your choice points related to productivity. And I think there are so many choice points in life that if we became more conscious of them, would immediately improve our life in so many ways. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in the next episode of Grow with Intention.